Throughout most of its development, Sonic X-Treme was worked on by a largely American staff at STI. Names like Ofer Elan, Chris Sen, and Christina Coffin should be familiar to those who have followed Sonic X-Treme's development in the past. However, for a brief period in time, Sonic team member and game planner for Sonic 1, 2, and 3, and Knuckles, Hirokazu Yasuhara, was asked to produce some game design concepts for the troubled game's development. Sonic R and Sonic 3D Blast aside, these images mark the only time that Yasuhara worked on a 3D Sonic game. Hey everybody, I'm Garrulous64, and I make videos usually on the Garrulous64 channel, but today I'm here to read you this very interesting script about the history of the cancelled Sonic game, Sonic X-Treme. And if you're a big fan of these cancelled projects like I am, you're gonna be extremely interested in this one, so stay tuned. Now with all that out of the way, let's examine some of this concept art and see what a 3D Sonic game from the original game's designer might have looked like. This first image here is a bit of an outlier as it's drawn at a different angle than most of the other drawings. In any case, it seems to be the opening scene of Jade Gully Zone, where you would have run down a path and presumably jumped over the fallen bridge, avoiding the spikes and crocodiles. There's also a key on a little bit of land sticking out of the water on the second path. It's hard to know if Sonic would have been free to jump between the two paths in this design, or if he would have been locked to a path similar to the Saturn game Bug. The rest of the level pages we'll be looking at have note pages to go along with them, but for some reason this first page has no accompanying notes page that details how its gimmicks or interactive bits would have worked. The next page is not too dissimilar to some of the automated sections of Green Grove from Sonic 3D Blast. Now you can also see how the rest of the pages are organized. The numbers on this page indicate an accompanying note on the following page. 1 shows off a loop in that signature Sonic style, 2 shows off how Sonic would run on a wall, 3 indicates a sideways loop, and finally 4 is the ramp, with a nice little Star Wars reference. Do you think Yasuhara is a prequel fan? These little Sonic doodles should be familiar to anyone who's looked into the development of Sonic 1, 2, or 3, as they're very reminiscent of the way that Yasuhara illustrated game concepts for those games, which of course includes his cute little doodles of Sonic. In this next area, the game opens up a bit. First, Sonic must make it past a collapsing bridge, then cross these platforms which sink into the water when stood on. This reveals a lower, more difficult path underwater where the player will have to avoid moving and stationary spikes while keeping an eye on how long they've been underwater. Just like the classics, Sonic would drown when underwater for too long and needed to surface or grab air bubbles to avoid death. Relatable. On the upper path, the player would encounter springs, called plungers in Yasuhara's notes, and these floating stones or wood tiles that Sonic could step on which would cause them to rotate. Or at least that's what it looks like. How this would have worked exactly is unfortunately unclear. The fourth page starts out with a little platforming via a breakable rock, which would have sent Sonic speeding down a slide controllable in 8 directions all the way to the loop-de-loop at the end and into a breakable wall. The last page in this act shows that Sonic would have continued sliding all the way up through the hole in the ground to level up, which shuts behind him. From there, the player would simply need to run up to the finishing sign and the level would end with Sonic automatically running through the gate. While reviewing these in an isometric view, we have to remember that Sonic X-Treme had a third-person camera behind the player, which was likely locked in place hard-coded into the game. Though it's worth noting that some of X-Treme's signature features, such as walking on the ceiling and perhaps the fisheye camera perspective, weren't taken into consideration when these designs were made. Let's skip ahead and look at Zone 2, which looks to be themed after a snowy forest. This, of course, would include slippery ice floors, followed by falling bridges and a pond frozen over that'll break when Sonic stands on it. Yasuhara also seems to have reused some gimmicks from Sonic 3, including the falling icicles that Sonic can jump on, and moving blocks that tend to appear in most Sonic games. The next page contains another narrow speed section with a loop-de-loop, likely intended to be fairly automated with just a handful of gimmicks thrown in. The third screen of Zone 2 Act 1 is a bit more interesting, featuring an avalanche, followed by a frozen pond, which leads up to a Mips bed? Maybe a little background is required here. Mips were creatures that in some Sonic X-Treme storylines were being captured on their homeworld and turned into robots, much like the Good Doctor did with animals on his own world. I actually didn't know that. That's actually pretty cool. The last page we'll look at is for Zone 4 Act 2. This layout is missing its notes page, but it starts off with some stairs that lead to a vertical conveyor platform like we've seen in Labyrinth Zone from Sonic 1. There appear to be 3 paths to follow off the conveyor platforms, which lead to some spiky floor panels that move up and down and all around, and a couple of swinging spike balls as seen in Spring Yard Zone or Marble Garden Zone. The paths continue with what appears to be moving groups of blocks and spring or plunger floors, as Yasuhara calls them on other note pages. It was also said by Sega producer Mike Wallace that the X-Treme team received the engine and tools from Nights into Dreams until Yuji Naka threatened to quit, at which point the tools were taken away. This, however, was refuted by both Naka and Christina Coffin of the Sonic X-Treme Project Condor team. So while Hirokazu Yasuhara had provided the conceptual designs for Sonic X-Treme, Sonic team head Yuji Naka was even less involved. And according to some sources at Sega of America, Sega of Japan had so little faith in the project that they didn't even plan to release Sonic X-Treme in their home country. Which to me sounds like one of the biggest reasons why this thing faded into obscurity. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. As a reminder, I've been Garrula64. You can find my links in the description down below. I make a lot of Sonic content and scripted videos like this, so I don't know, it could be something you're interested in. Lastly, I wanted to give a huge thank you to Overbound for letting me narrate this video. I had a really great time doing it, and thank you so much for watching. This has been a Game Fact Special.